Hey everyone, today we're sewing up my new pattern, the SOAR Dopp Kit. This is a pattern designed for vinyl and waterproof canvas, and it uses Decovil Light for the stabilizer, although you can use other materials if you prefer. It has a double pull zipper closure, and it has this unique feature at the side where the top corners cinch down, which give you a compact finished bag, but that can open up to allow you to more easily access the contents of your bag compared to the traditional style of boxy bag. This pattern looks like a boxy bag, but it goes together more like a standard zipper pouch pattern with just a slightly different zipper installation method. The finished bag measures 7 inches wide, 4 inches deep, and about 3 3/4 of an inch tall. I often see comments that there are not a lot of patterns that have a more masculine design to them, and that was my goal with this particular pattern, but it can be done in lots of different prints so that it can be used by anyone. I want to say thank you to my tester team for being so patient with me during the making of this pattern and for all of your feedback to streamline all of the processes involved. So let's get going. Some tools that you may find helpful for completing this bag are double-sided tape, scissors or rotary cutter, a removable ink pen, seam roller. I like to use a lighter to reduce any fraying. I have a ruler, and I also have my hole punch for my rivets. I have my rivet press and edge paint if you choose to edge paint your swivel hook connector pieces. And of course, clips. For this tutorial, you'll need your cut exterior pieces. You will need your cut lining pieces, noting on the lining that your bottom corners do not have a 90-degree angle at the inside corner, so make sure that that is cut from the pattern piece. You will also need pieces for your D-ring tabs. I am using the scraps from one of my exterior pieces. You will need swivel hook connector pieces. You will need zipper by the yard or a handbag zipper that is 14 inches long, 1 or 2 zipper pulls, as well as 2 swivels, 2 D-rings, and 4 rivets. You can sew these on if you prefer that over using rivets. However, because of the number of layers that you're going through when you attach these swivel hook connectors, I recommend using rivets if you have access to those. The first thing that we're going to do is fuse our stabilizer to our exterior panels. Take your exterior piece, and we need to apply our stabilizer to the back. I have fused my stabilizer centered between the top and the bottom and the 2 sides. The stabilizer piece is slightly offset, so the cutout at the bottom is slightly bigger than the cutout at the top. So you want to make sure that your piece has the larger cutout where your bottom boxed corners are. If you're using woven for your exterior, then you would need to add interfacing. If you're using vinyl, then the Decovil will be fine on its own. It is possible to cut your Decovil so that it is in pieces rather than this one single piece. You can cut it so that the center piece is 7 by 7 inches and fuse that in the middle of your exterior panel, and then have 2 separate side pieces that measure 2 inches by 3 1/4 inches and place those so that they are 1/2 inch up from this boxed cutout. The benefit of that is that you can use some scraps when you're replacing your stabilizer, and it also gives you nice squared edges on your finished SOAR Dopp Kit. If you want to use the single piece, but you still want to have those crisp edges, then you can crease your Decovil at this point here by folding in the side before you fuse it to the back of your exterior piece. You will fuse the stabilizer to both of your exterior pieces, then set those aside while we get to work on our D-ring connectors and our swivel hook connectors. When you are making your swivel hook connectors, you have 2 pieces that are joined together to create a double layer tab. And you then have the option of edge painting around the edge of that connector or leaving it raw. If you are going to leave it raw, I would consider the type of vinyl that you're using, as some vinyl tends to be a little bit more fluffy around the edge. If you do have a fluffier vinyl, but it is what you really want to use, you can singe the fluffiness off with a lighter to give you a smoother edge. But if you are going to be leaving yours raw, I recommend picking a vinyl that is less likely to be fluffy at the edge. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do the swivel tabs. One is by taking 2 matching pieces and placing them wrong sides together, like so, and then you can either glue or use double-sided tape to stick those pieces together. Line up the edges, and then let the glue dry. And once the glue has dried, you can sew around the outside of your tab, and then if you wish, you can add your edge paint to the outside of your tab. The other option to help your edges to line up perfectly would be to take a larger piece and then attach swivel hook connectors to the back. And once the glue has dried or it is stuck down with your double-sided tape, trim around the edge to get it to line up. Make sure when you're placing double-sided tape that you're keeping it outside of the seam allowance. And you can line up one edge if you like, or stick it down in the middle. And then you're just going to trim the larger piece so that the edges line up with the cut piece. I like to use a pair of nice sharp scissors for this. And once you have those two pieces ready to go, you can sew around the entire outside of your swivel connector. Just sewing straight around the outside of this tab. I like to start and stop my stitches so that they are hidden somewhere that will be underneath my finished bag. So you can start that at the top or at the side here. However, if you are planning to sew your swivel hook connector onto your bag rather than use rivets, I recommend sewing just the side here, leaving the top unsewn, and when you sew it to your finished bag, you'll fold it over and sew across the top then. So I would leave that unsewn for the moment. Using a longer stitch length and a seam allowance of 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to start with long tails rather than back stitching. Although again, if you're going to be hiding this underneath the upper edge of your bag, you could back stitch. It would be difficult to see that part of the bag on your finished product. Adjust to get the correct placement at the corner. Pull your tails through and tie those off, and then use a needle to tuck them back between the layers. Repeat that for the second side, and then you can neaten up the edges if they are not lined up perfectly. And if you wish, you can edge paint around the edges of those swivel hook connectors. So then you're just going to take your needle and you're just going to slide it between the layers, making sure that you're staying just on the back side. And then you're going to take your tails and pull them through. And then you can trim where they're coming out of the material. The next thing we need to do in our preparation is to cut our D-ring connector pieces that will go in the bottom seam of the bag. You're going to cut a piece that is 2 inches by 1.5 inches. And I like to cut mine out of the cutout corners from my exterior to save material. Draw a line down the center back of that D-ring connector piece. That will be at 3/4 of an inch from the edge. We then need to fold the long edge in to meet that line in the center. I like to use double-sided tape to stick that down. Place a strip of double-sided tape over that line. And then fold the long edge in. And then press it down. If you were using a thicker vinyl, then before folding your edges in, just trim the corner off so that when you fold your edges in, you reduce some of the bulk in the center. And now we're ready to sew around our D-ring connectors. When I'm sewing around the D-ring tabs that will be in the bottom seam of my finished bag, I like to start in a short end. You can backstitch on this because it will be hidden within the seam allowance. And then using the same longer stitch length and sewing around at 1/8 of an inch. Repeat for the second one. Trim those threads. And then the other thing that I like to do after I have top stitched around my D-ring connectors is just slide the D-rings on, fold the ends over, and sew across the raw edge to keep those in place so that they're ready to be sewn into the bottom seam of the bag once I get up to that step. And I just like to baste that at about 5/16 of an inch, so it will be within the bottom seam allowance, but it's held nicely together. You can sew it just at the very edge if you like, but because my top stitching is at the 1/8 of an inch line, I prefer not to sew in the same place on vinyl more than I need to so that I don't put extra holes and increase the risk of any perforation. We'll set the connectors and the swivel connectors aside for now and continue working on the main part of our bag. We're now ready to start constructing the main part of our bag. I just want to take a moment to point out the shape of the lining versus the shape of the exterior. You can see that at the top, the cutout is the same. The measurement across the top matches between the exterior and the lining. But as we come to the side, you can see that the lining tapers in and that the lining piece is shorter than our exterior and the shape of the boxed corner is slightly different. The reason for that is so that the lining sits nice and snugly inside of the exterior, and this shape of that box corner is going to give us a flat base for our lining. When you line the two side seams up, it creates a 180-degree angle there, so we know that our lining will sit flat inside of our bag. Take your two linings and your two exteriors as well as your zipper tape and make sure that you have the centers marked on all four pieces as well as both sides of your zipper. I'm also going to mark the ends of my zipper tape so that I can see which side I need to start putting my zipper pull on. So if I look at the end, the furthest tooth is on the right hand side at this end, so I will put a small snip so that I know when I'm putting my pulls on, I'm going to start from that side. And at the other end, looking at the end, it's also on the right hand side. So when I go to put my zipper tape back together, I will know that if I start on the marked side, I'm going to end up with zipper teeth that are nice and even, and that is going to help me maintain straight edges on my finished bag. Marking all of those pieces, and then I'm going to place double-sided tape across the upper edge of my exterior and my linings. Keeping my double-sided tape as close to the edge of my material as I can so that it is not in my seam allowance when I install my zipper. Take one exterior and one lining piece and your zipper tape. Remove the backing from the double-sided tape that is on your exterior and line up the center of your zipper tape with the center of your exterior with the teeth facing down on the right side of the exterior. And you're going to press that all the way along. You will have a fair amount of zipper tape hanging off the edge, and that is to help when we need to install our zipper pulls. Take your lining, remove the backing from that double-sided tape also, and lay the lining piece right sides down on the back of the zipper tape and right sides together with the exterior. We're now going to sew the zipper in place. When we're sewing the zipper, we're going to be using a seam allowance of 5/16 of an inch. That is a very specific seam allowance, but it is necessary to get the neat top of the bag when we are all done. So I am going to draw in that seam allowance. And it should be noted that the line is not meeting up with the bottom of the corner cutout on the exterior at the top. It is just a little shy of that. That corner cutout is 3/8 of an inch in and the line is 5/16. So it's just a 1/16 of an inch inside of it, but it is necessary to have it like that. I'm going to sew from one end to the other, back stitching at the beginning and at the end using a shorter stitch length. I'm using my zipper foot and I will be sewing straight on that line that we've drawn. Press the exterior away from the zipper tape. And you can, if you like, put double-sided tape within the seam allowance to help that lay flat away from your zipper. I'm going to use a clip to just hold my exterior back for the moment. And we are going to sew the zipper to the other side, lining up the center of the second side of the exterior with that center on your zipper tape and working from the center out to the side, keeping it nice and straight. Check when you get to the edge that your exterior sides are lined up. same with your lining. And if you haven't already, draw in that seam allowance line so that you are getting that exact 5/16 of an inch. So that line for 5/16 falls between your 1/4 and your 3/8 line. If you look at the end of your ruler, the little teeny tiny marks here, it's this one, number 5, from the outside edge. And we'll sew that side also. Same way as the first, sewing through the exterior, the zipper tape, which is face up to the exterior, and the lining. Sewing from the boxed corner cutout at one end to the boxed corner cutout at the other end. With both sides of that zipper sewn in place, press the exterior back, and if you're having trouble keeping it nice and smooth, add that double-sided tape, making sure that it is right up against the edge of your seam allowance so that it doesn't end up in your top stitching line. We're going to press that seam allowance down flat, and then we're going to top stitch on either side of that zipper tape at 1/8 of an inch. When we're top stitching on either side of the zipper, we are going to be sewing through the exterior and the lining. We are going to be starting just at the point where the boxed corner cutout is. There's an ever so slightly visible mark, which is where that 1/16 of an inch was when we sewed our 5/16 of an inch seam allowance for the zipper. We're going to start there, sew all the way along to the other end. This will be hidden in the end connectors, so you can backstitch here if you wish, or you can take long tails and pull them through to the back. Make sure it is nicely smoothed out, that you're happy with your spacing on either side of your zipper, and you'll do that on both sides, sewing through the exterior, the zipper tape, and the lining for one side and then the other. Using a longer stitch length and increasing your tension if you need to for the added layers. Top stitching seam allowance is 1/8 of an inch. Repeat on the second side. Again, starting just at that section at the top boxed corner. Trim your threads. And the next step is to sew the exterior bottom seam. Fold your exterior panels together so that the center bottom lines up at the edges of the boxed corners. And clip along that edge, keeping your linings out of the way. You can also place a clip at the side seam to help keep it all lined up, but we're not going to be sewing the side seams just yet. We're going to sew from one edge to the other edge, back stitching at the beginning and at the end using a seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch. Using my shorter stitch length, trim your threads, and making sure that you have marked your zipper tape so that you know which side to start applying your pull from. We're going to open out the zipper tape completely. So now you have your bag separated into one long piece. Go to the bottom seam, and we're going to press that open. You can use double-sided tape to press the seam allowance to either side of that bottom seam, making sure that it is right at the very edge. And then we will press the bottom seam open, and we will top stitch 1/8 of an inch from that center bottom seam. When I'm top stitching, I'm going to start at one end, back stitch in the side seam, sew all the way down, pivot and sew across the end, sew back up and back stitch at the other end. Making sure my linings are well out of the way. Take your completed D-ring tab and you're going to center it over that center seam so that it's hanging over about 1/8 of an inch or in line with where that bottom stitch line is. You're going to baste that to the center bottom of your bag, making sure that it is perpendicular to that boxed corner cutout, basting at 1/8 of an inch. Do the same for the other side. We now need to place our zipper pulls. When you are using 2 zipper pulls, there is a method to make sure that your zippers meet up perfectly in the middle and they don't have a bubble and they are not offset. And that is the reason that we marked the zipper tape earlier in the process. I'm going to work from this angle. If you find that to be too difficult, you can turn your bag this way and then turn it back out through the sides of your bag. You want to have your zipper tape facing up regardless of the positioning of your bag. Take a look at your zipper tape, and starting on the side that we have marked, slide your zipper pull on so that the zipper teeth are just at the very edge of your zipper pull. Then take the other side and slide that tape in to meet the zipper tape. When you feel them touch, you're going to slide the first side down, in this case the right side, until you feel them click together. And then you want to push from the back of your zipper pull. You're going to check now if your zipper teeth are lined up, and I can see that there is a gap here. So I need to maneuver my zipper tape so that there are no gaps, but this tooth on the right hand side needs to be the first tooth when I have finished putting my pulls on. So I'll slide it again, and I will repeat until I get the teeth in the correct alignment. Just pulling the coils down inside of that zipper pull. And now that is lined up. You can slide your pull all the way off and then apply both zipper pulls again, or you can slide your pull to the middle. My pull is here in the middle, and now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Starting on the marked side so that I know my teeth are going to be back in the original alignment from when I cut my length of zipper tape. Slide in the first side, slide it down. When the coils meet in the middle, push from the back, and they are in the correct order. There are no gaps, so I can slide my pull again to the center, and you can see that my pulls meet perfectly in the middle. What I now need to do is trim my zipper tape. I'm going to fold my exterior and my lining back. Using a clip can help keep it out of the way. And I'm going to be trimming my zipper tape so that it is flush with the edge of this box corner. And that is going to make it significantly easier to sew the side seams of my bag. My zipper pulls are already on. I'm going to clip straight across that zipper tape. The same at the other end. And now that the zipper tape is trimmed down, having been careful not to clip into my exterior at all, I'm going to singe the ends, and then I'm going to baste across the end of my zipper tape so that my zipper pulls that I've worked so hard to get lined up in the middle do not come off the zipper when I am finishing up sewing my bag. Sewing basting stitches along the end of that zipper at both ends, sewing just through the zipper tape, not through the exterior or the lining, to secure those zipper pulls so that they don't come off when I'm continuing to sew up my bag. And once I have sewn across the end of that zipper tape to secure my pulls, I can continue sewing the rest of my bag. We're now ready to sew our exterior side seams and our lining side seams. The right sides of your exterior facing each other, we're going to clip along this edge and this edge. Because of the way that the top corner is sewn, I find it's easier to sew the exterior separately to the lining. So rather than sewing straight along in one go like you would with a regular style of zipper pouch, we're going to sew the exterior first. Line up the edges of your exterior at the bottom boxed corner and the top. I like to pull my lining out of the way. Sliding your zipper open slightly gives you somewhere to clip the lining panel so that it is not near the side. And now we're going to sew down the side. I find it easier to sew from the bottom towards the top. Considerations are that it is a little tight at the top here, so you may find it's easier to use your zipper foot as opposed to your regular presser foot. And we're going to be sewing at 3/8 of an inch, back stitching at the top and at the bottom, taking care not to sew into our lining panels or our zipper tape. I'm starting at the bottom, shorter stitch length. I'm using my regular presser foot, but you may prefer to use your zipper foot or a narrow foot if you are concerned about coming up to the top here where your zipper is. Making sure that the lining is not underneath the presser foot at all. And as you get close, you may find a hump jumper is helpful. Back stitch at the top. And repeat on the other side. Again, keeping that lining well out of the way. And that little tail of your zipper out of the way too. Just going to switch to my zipper foot and just sew the top there where it's just gone a little crooked. You can just get a bit closer. There are two different ways that you can close up the bottom of your bag. You can leave a turning hole in the bottom of about 5 inches and then berth your bag through that hole, or you can leave the entire bottom open, berth the bag, and then close up your boxed corners using the alternative method that I showed you in a recent skill builder video. I'm going to demonstrate both ways to close up the bottom of your bag. Before I show you the two options for closing up the bottom of your bag, we'll sew the lining side seam. Trim your threads, and at the end where the zipper teeth are, just want to tuck those in towards the exterior to give yourself space to sew the side seam. We're going to pull the lining away from the exterior and away from the zipper. And we're going to place some clips lining up the outside edge. Sewing down this edge at 3/8 of an inch, I've left my zipper foot on, as this part here, when you get up to the lining, because of the way it is sewn, it does get a little tight there. So as you come up to the top, if you pull your exterior away to the side, making sure that the edges of your lining are still lined up, then you can get this zipper to move away a little more from that side seam. You don't want to catch it in your stitches. Just poke mine towards the exterior of the bag. There is going to be a gap there, just kind of like a very teeny tiny boxed corner. Just keep that lining matched up as well as you can. Sewing the other side of the lining using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, because the lining piece is already tapered, so you don't need to adjust the seam allowance for your lining. Again, pulling it back out of the way, and then after you've sewn up the top, clear of where that zipper is, you can go back over any sections that are not quite as straight as you might like them to be. I've trimmed those threads, and the other thing that I'm going to do is just trim back the corners for the lining and the exterior. We'll also be trimming the top corners, but I'm not going to do that yet. And we're just reducing the bulk. And now we can box up the exterior corners. Because of the bulk of that D-ring connector, the bottom corners of the exterior can be a little trickier. So something I like to do is just compress them a little with my key fob pliers. Just protect my vinyl with a scrap. And then just press down where that D-ring is, just to flatten that vinyl a little. And then when I clip my edges, you want to line up the side seam with the bottom seam, which should also be the center of your D-ring connector. And because we're going to be going around this bulk, I like to place a clip on either side. You can also put a staple in here if you like, but I'm going to do a row of stitches at 1/8 of an inch first, and then sew my full seam allowance once I can move the clips out of the way. Repeat the same steps on the second side, lining up the bottom and the side seam and the center of that D-ring. And when I'm sewing, I will have my hump jumper handy and my stiletto to tuck the exterior nice and tightly around that D-ring so that I don't have gaps in my bottom seam. So sewing first at 1/8 of an inch, and then I will sew the full seam allowance. And you can choose if you want to open that out or if you want to press it to one side. Again, we've clipped away some of the bulk so that there's less of a problem with that D-ring connector there. You may also prefer to use a narrower foot because you've got the D-ring right here. I'm going to be sewing with my needle in the far left position so that my presser foot can get past. Got my stiletto and my hump jumper. I'm just going to place my hump jumper underneath the presser foot. And then as I come up, I'm just going to press down on my material so that it is hugging that connector. Need my other hump jumper. I'll use this style of hump jumper for this. It's a bit easier to get it nice and snug underneath. It's coming up. Just get my stiletto underneath. Jumper back on this side. And just pushing down on the material here so that it's hugging around that D-ring. Just careful of the needle as it comes off. And then to stop that from jumping down off the bulk, keep the hump jumper in position, and then you can let the presser foot down gradually. So that's basted. I'll baste the other side, and then I'll be able to sew both bottom seams without having the clips in the way, which will make it a lot easier to get across in a straight line. Okay, as it comes up and it's having trouble getting over, pop the hump jumper underneath. Continue along. Make sure my vinyl is flat. Clip out of the way. Stiletto to make the exterior hug around that connector. Making sure the connector is staying straight. Hump jumper again on the other side. This is the basting stitch, so if it skips a stitch or two here, I'm not going to worry about correcting it. This is just to get everything positioned for that final bottom seam. If you're sewing on a domestic, vinyl may not be the best choice, at least for your connector piece. You could do a fabric connector and do the rest in vinyl. Now we're going to sew the seam again using our full 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. My connector is here, so I'm going to switch to my zipper foot. And back stitch. I'm sewing straight along the bottom seam. Come up to that bulk. Place my hump jumper underneath. Stiletto. Being careful of where my D-ring connector is. You do not want to hit that with your needle. Back stitch again. Do the same for the other side. So I'm thinking about this pattern and I'm not sure I would call this a beginner-friendly pattern. This is doable by beginners, but there are some trickier things that require a good knowledge of the materials your machine can handle and working in tight places, bulky sections. So it's definitely a good skill building pattern, but if you're starting out, this is not what I would recommend as your first pattern. Probably the bee boxy would be a good one to start with, or honestly probably just the Betty pouch would be a good one to start with. But you'll get there. You just have to know some of the ways to get around bulk on your sewing machine before you can tackle this one. Because the materials that I've used for this bag are a little on the thicker side, given the size of the bag, being vinyl and Decovil Light on the exterior, as well as waterproof canvas for the lining, it is a little tricky to turn through a small turning hole in your lining. If you are going to berth the bag through a hole in the lining, I recommend having an opening of about 5 inches to make that a little easier for you. So you're going to sew 1.5 inches in from either side, and then you can box your corners and turn your bag out through that hole in the lining. An alternative way to do it would be to turn it out before you box the corners, and then we will do the turning hole hack to box our corners once we have turned the bag out. So leaving the bottom of your bag entirely open and your corners unboxed, open your zipper all the way out, which is why we basted the ends, and then you can turn your bag through that large opening. Poke out your corners, and before we close up the bottom of the lining, if you like, you can press the exterior of your bag from the inside to minimize any creases from turning that out. I'm fairly happy with that, so I'm going to leave mine. And now we need to close up the lining. To close the lining after we've already turned the bag out, what we need to do is fold the edges of our lining out over our side seam. And we're going to line those up. This is our side seam here, and this is the bottom seam. And I'm just lining up the lower edge there. This is my boxed corner, not yet closed up. And I'm going to clip a section on just one side that is about 2 inches across. I'm going to backstitch at this end, which is where my boxed corner is, and sew up 2 inches, pivot, and sew towards the outside edge of the lower part of my lining. Using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch, and then sew along for about 2 inches. Keeping the lower edge of that lining as well lined up as possible. And then I'm going to pivot 90 degrees and sew perpendicular to that bottom seam. Then go to your boxed corner on that side of the lining and open it out. You can trim that corner there too if you wish. And you're going to either butterfly your seam, press it to either side, or if you have clipped it, it's going to mostly be clear at the center there. Flatten out that edge, clip along, and then we're just going to box that corner the same way as we would have boxed the corner if we had done it before turning out our bag. I find pulling at the side where that angled bit is and placing a clip can help keep the edge of my box corner nicely lined up. And you can see that it is nice and flat. We should be sewing in a straight line, and again using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I like to reinforce at the center point and back stitching at the beginning and the end. Trim those threads and then we will work on the other side. In order to complete the other boxed corner, we need to tuck the first one in. And then we come to the other side and we do the same thing. Pulling the lower edge of the lining piece out over the side seam and clipping along about 2 inches. The reason that we don't sew more than about 2 inches is because we have to pull the second side out over the side seam, and we are limited by the corner we have already boxed. You could do a hybrid of the two methods of closing up, where you would sew one side of your lining turning hole and box one corner with your bag inside out, flip it around, and then do the second one this way. So clip that along as far as you can, making sure that you're not sewing through any parts of your lining that you shouldn't be. Placing an extra clip further along from where we will be stopping our stitch line can help keep everything lined up too. Flatten it out as best as you can, keeping the boxed corner nicely aligned. Back stitch at the beginning. And just feeling under here to make sure that it is nice and flat. And pivot, come off again. Then you're going to box that second lining corner, and now we are boxing it through what would have been the turning hole. So lining up the center seam, make sure that you're pushing your bottom seam to the same side as you pushed it on the other boxed corner. So mine is pushed towards me, so I want to make sure that I push this one towards me also. This is the bottom. Pull it out as much as you can. Make sure that your edges are lined up, and they should be lined up in a nice straight line. And that's how you know that you have pulled your lining out adequately to box your corner. And I'm going to sew along there at 3/8 of an inch. Just pull it around more on itself to get a little bit more room if you need to. It's a little fiddly, so you do have the option of doing it through the turning hole if you wish. Just make sure that your turning hole is big enough. I'm going to show you both ways. And then just going to trim those threads and tuck that corner in also. And when you've tucked it all in, you're just going to have a regular opening in your lining like you would if you had used that hole for turning. But if you prefer, you can do it the other way. You'll sew the bottom sections of your lining, box your corners, and then turn your bag out. The other option is just a regular turning hole. We're going to mark an opening in the bottom of our lining pieces of about 5 inches. So mark 1.5 inches in from each of your boxed corners and place clips, making sure that the boxed corner itself is nicely lined up. So we're going to be sewing these 2 sections of the bottom of the bag, leaving a turning hole in the lining. When you're sewing the bottom seam, you're going to back stitch at the end where your boxed corner is, and then sew up to the mark. And when you get to the mark, you can choose to either back stitch away from the opening and have your threads at this end so that your stitches close to the opening are tighter and you don't have the threads in the opening, or you can pivot 90 degrees and sew off the edge of the fabric and back stitch here, and that will help your seam to fold in nicely when you're done. I am going to back stitch away from the opening. Make sure that you're leaving that gap. And then I'm going to do the same on this side, starting a little beyond where I've made my mark. Back stitch up to the opening and then sew forward. Finish up at the other corner, sewing with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to trim all of those threads, trim back the corners, and then we can box our corners. And you can choose to push it to one side or the other side, or to butterfly it open. We have trimmed that to reduce the bulk. And you can see that the edge there is nice and flat. And that is why we had the boxed corner shaped the way that it was, because we had that tapered side seam. Place some clips. I like to place a few along the straight edge and then one at the angled side to help keep everything in line. I like to have my bottom seam point the same direction so there's no twists, which can also create bulk at the bottom of your bag. And again, using the same 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to switch back to my regular presser foot. Back stitching at the beginning, so straight along this edge. Back stitch again. You can reinforce your stitches at the center point if you like. So the other lining corner. Trim those threads, and we are also going to trim the top corner next to our zipper. So here where we have the exterior and the lining, we're just going to trim the top of that side seam. So that's going to be the point on the exterior of our bag that is covered up by our swivel hook connectors. So we're going to turn our whole bag out through this opening in the lining. You can apply some heat from your hairdryer to make that a little easier to do if you've used vinyl and waterproof canvas like I have. And just be mindful that Decovil can crease a little. And heat can help with that also. And you can see here that the shape of this is, at the moment, kind of just like a regular zipper pouch. If you like, you can choose to close your lining up now. I'm going to clip mine, but I'm not going to close it just yet. And then tuck your lining in. Make sure that you're happy with the fit. Once you've tucked your lining in and out of the way, you need to do the final shaping of the bag before we attach our swivel connectors. With the zippers closed, go to the edge of your bag and you're going to fold out a corner, and you can see how that will clip down onto the D-ring at the side. This is going to give us the boxy shape on our bag. If we don't do that, then it's just going to be a regular pouch type shape. The shape of the Decovil stabilizer with the cutouts at the top corners is what allows the bag to easily form that angled corner at the top there. Take your scissors and we're just going to trim that extra little bit of your zipper teeth. And I'm going to singe that end again. And then I'm going to baste along this end of my zipper 1/2 inch from the outside edge, making sure that I'm keeping my zipper tape centered so that it is in line with that side seam, and flattening out that top corner so that it is even on both sides of the zipper. Sewing along this end and this end. And I want to make sure that on the inside, my lining is smoothed out inside of those corners and not bunched up. Placing a couple of clips can help keep everything in position. And then some across here and across here before we place our swivel connectors. You may find it easier to sew with your bag upside down at this point. This is just a basting row of stitches, and it will be hidden under the connector. This is going to help make sure that our bag is the right shape before we place our swivels. We're now going to secure our swivel hooks. My preferred method for doing this is using rivets, although you can sew along the short edge of your swivel hook connector if you choose, although it is quite bulky, so I would consider whether this is the best option for your particular materials and your machine. First thing that we're going to do is punch the holes in our swivel hook connectors, which we will also use as pilot holes for attaching the swivel hook to the main part of our bag. Take your swivel tabs, a grid ruler, and a pen. And you're going to make a mark that is 3/8 of an inch in from the outermost edge of your swivel connector and 1/4 of an inch down, which will place the mark roughly in the middle of the point without going through any of your stitches. And you'll place a mark and punch a hole in each of the 4 corners on both tabs. I'm using a scant 1/4 of an inch, so I want to make sure that my mark sits below the line on my ruler. So I'm just going to slide it back a little to get the placement. When you're satisfied with those marks, punch your holes and repeat for the second connector. Then retrieve your bag exterior, your swivel hooks, and 4 pairs of rivets, 2 for each connector. Place a strip of double-sided tape at each of the short edges of your swivel connectors. Folding the corners into the center, slide on your swivel hook so that the hook is facing the outside. Working from the section that is the bottom of your swivel hook, which can be based on where you have started and finished your stitches, or if there are any imperfections on the back of your piece that you want to have hidden underneath, remove the backing on just the bottom part. And lightly press that in position so that the angled corner of your bag is about 1/4 of an inch from the center of your swivel connector and centered from left to right. The 1/4 of an inch gap will leave space for the bulk at the end of your zipper and for your hardware. Fold the swivel over and check your positioning, making sure that the edges at the corner and at the side are as well lined up as possible. Grab your clips and hold that in place. Then use a pen to mark the exterior of your bag where you will punch the holes through the exterior corner. Remove the swivel connector. Check that that placement is even. Adjust it if necessary. Peel that off. And then punch holes through the exterior, making sure that the lining on the inside is smoothed out. You'll be punching through the folded over exterior and the folded over lining inside. Take your rivets and place them through the holes in your swivel connector on the side where you've removed your double-sided tape already. And then poke the posts through the holes you just made in the main part of your bag. Remove the backing from the other edge and then fold that over. Poke the posts through the holes. Place your caps. And then go ahead and set those rivets. Repeat those steps for the other side. Placing clips just beyond where the marks are can help keep everything aligned and smoothed out for when you punch those holes through the main part of your bag. If you haven't already, go ahead and close up your lining. Then close your zippers and clip those swivel hooks to the D-rings. And then you're all finished. There is your completed SOAR Dopp Kit, ready to take you around the world. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.
So this is the hat. It has a hat on it.
You don't have to yell at him.
And this is the hat. It has a hat with a hat on it. Now, the best part about cancer is you can really step up your hat game.
Stupid.